Embracing the flank, white aims for a more flexible pawn structure, immediately challenging central influence and preparing for varied strategic developments. Establishing symmetry immediately sets a balanced tone, creating a robust pawn chain that challenges central influence from both sides. Developing the knight initiates a flexible pawn structure, aiming to control the center and prepare for castling. Establishing a central pawn presence while preparing rapid piece development, this response avoids immediate weaknesses. A natural development, reinforcing control of d5 and preparing d4, though it somewhat blocks the c3 knight's diagonal. Developing the knight to its natural square, this move prepares for central pawn pushes and reinforces the d-pawn. This fianchetto opens a long-term diagonal for the bishop, preparing to control central squares from afar and support the kingside. Opening the center immediately challenges white's g3 setup, aiming for active piece play. Opening the center forcefully, white immediately challenges black's central pawn with a daring pawn thrust. Opening the diagonal for the dark-squared bishop and reinforcing the center, this establishes a solid structure against white's pawn thrust. Opens the c-file, creating immediate pressure and a dynamic pawn structure for ensuing middle-game skirmishes. Reclaiming the pawn centralizes the knight, opening lines for immediate counterplay and challenging white's central grip. Unleashing the bishop on this diagonal, white aims to exploit potential weaknesses in black's pawn structure and gain active piece play. Relocating the knight to b6, away from the central pawn chain's pressure, now supports the c5 pawn and eyes the queenside. Developing the bishop here pressures the knight, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially create weaknesses. A tactical gamble, aiming to disrupt white's bishop chain and gain space, though it potentially weakens the kingside structure for the long run. Recapturing on c5 relinquishes control of the central pawn majority and opens lines prematurely. Reclaiming the pawn with the bishop, black now enjoys superior piece activity and opens lines for their other forces. A bold knight sacrifice opens a tactical labyrinth, potentially unraveling black's pawn structure. Exchanging queens here simplifies the position, potentially heading into an endgame where white's development advantage might be less significant. Opening the d-file offers significant pressure, with the rook now poised to exploit enemy weaknesses. Checking the king's escape squares, this knight's sacrifice opens a crucial diagonal for the bishop's assault. Securing the bishop and preparing to contest the central files, white aims to stabilize the position after the queen trade. Exchanging bishops simplifies the position, creating a clear path for your rook to become active on the open file. Consolidating the knight's outpost on a central square frees up the rook and prepares a pawn push, potentially opening lines. Shifting the king to e7 is a sensible precaution, securing it from the bishop's diagonal pressure and preparing for piece redistribution. Unleashing pawns to gain breathing room, white boldly confronts the central pawn structure and seeks to develop kingside initiative. Expanding on the queenside, black aims to outmaneuver white's isolated knight. Asserting dominance on the queenside, this knight prepares to harass black's vulnerable pawns and outposts. Pushing the pawn to a4 aims to restrict white's knight's influence and potentially gain queenside space. This pawn advance aims to disrupt black's advanced knight and prepare for a central pawn push, potentially opening lines for white's rooks. Developing the rook to a more active file often signals intent to contest open lines, anticipating endgame play. Asserting control over the crucial central files offers white excellent counterplay. Unifying the rooks offers passive defense, but concedes valuable central space. The knight's outpost on d3 creates a powerful central blockade and prepares for a pawn storm on the queenside. Solidifying the bishop's outpost and preparing to contest the open d-file with a unified pawn structure. Repositioning the monarch towards the center offers a safer haven and prepares for potential pawn advances. A strategic repositioning, this bishop now eyes the queenside and prepares for potential pawn pushes. Re-establishing control of the d-file and preparing for potential pawn advances, offers white renewed central influence. The knight abandons the center's tactical skirmishes for a quieter, though potentially passive, repositioning, seeking refuge on the queenside's open files and possibly supporting a future pawn advance. Reclaiming the central square allows white to prepare for a potential advance and contest the d-file dominance. The rook's maneuver to a7 aims to activate it along the 7th rank, seeking potential pressure points and coordination with other pieces. Opening the bishop's diagonal aims to liberate the piece and prepare for further pawn advances on the kingside. Introducing significant pawn tension, this move carves out space for black's pieces, though it potentially weakens the e6 square. Initiating a kingside pawn storm to cramp black's position and potentially open lines. Aggressively challenging the central pawn structure, this move seeks to disrupt white's space advantage and create dynamic counterplay. Reclaiming the knight's central influence is crucial for disrupting black's pawn structure. Opening the queenside further, black liberates his rook and aims to gain queenside space. Consolidating the knight's position sets the stage for a potential central pawn push, aiming to restrict black's maneuvering. Intensifying the pressure on the queenside, this knight aims to disrupt white's queenside structure and potentially infiltrate. Asserting central influence, white aims to exploit the weakened light squares and prepare for a pawn storm on the kingside. Unblocking the bishop allows it to eye the queenside pawns and prepare for potential counterplay. Consolidating pressure on the queenside is paramount as white seeks to restrict black's active pieces and prepare for an eventual breakthrough. Reinforcing the pawn chain, black seeks to solidify their queenside structure against the looming knight outpost. Opening the g-file exploits the slightly loose king and creates dynamic imbalances. Initiating pawn chain disruption opens critical lines, forcing white to defend exposed pieces. Reinforcing the bishop's influence, this maneuver aims to prepare for a queenside pawn advance, potentially creating attacking chances. A daring foray into enemy territory, the knight disrupts white's structure and seeks active play. Trading bishops aims to simplify, but it exposes your kingside a bit too much given black's knight activity. Trading rooks clears the 7th rank, potentially activating your queen and aiming for pawn breakthroughs. Exchanging rooks on the d-file solidifies your control of the open file and prepares for a more active rook placement. Opening the e-file creates immediate tension, forcing white to address the advanced pawn's potential. Re-establishing pressure on the d-file, white aims to exploit black's doubled pawns and passive pieces. Controlling the open file offers a temporary advantage, but neglects development of the queenside. Liberating the rook immediately confronts black's vulnerable pawn chain, aiming to disrupt their defensive setup. Centralizing the king here attempts to improve its defensive position and participate in the fight for control of the d-file. Unblocking the d-file, this rook redeployment aims to disrupt black's nascent coordination and probe for weaknesses. The rook's repositioning now locks down the c-file, creating crucial defensive pressure against white's pieces. Rethinking the rook's placement on the 7th rank provides attacking potential. The knight's leap to c4 ignites a potent challenge, threatening the rook and aiming to disrupt white's queenside stability. A powerful royal discovery, forcing the king into a corner and seizing control of the crucial diagonal. Re-engaging the king into the fray offers attacking chances, but exposes it to potential fireworks on the open files. Seizing the open file now, white aims to exploit black's misplaced king and isolated pawns. Activating the bishop on this diagonal grants immediate pressure and disrupts white's pawn structure. Targeting the vulnerable king with a decisive fork, this check forces immediate structural changes. Seeking activity, the king ventures forward, hoping to exploit the open files and create counterplay amidst the unfolding complications. Clearing the central files unlocks dynamic counterplay for white's rooks. Trading the rook now decisively simplifies into a very favorable endgame for white, capitalizing on black's compromised king. a bold sacrifice to expose the enemy king's precarious shelter. The king's exposed position now leads to an immediate material loss. Securing the passed pawn on b6 allows for a decisive material advantage. The rook's active post now poses a significant threat to white's scattered pawns. A desperate king hunt begins, aiming to expose the black monarch's precarious perch. The black king retreats, a necessary but precarious shuffle as white consolidates their material advantage. The king steps forward, a bold declaration to dominate the open diagonals and square.